Dr. King, well, first off, when a friend of mine, who's in this room actually, was buying a piece of property, everyone in this room is a deep participant in this process, but this friend of mine brought this over and says, yeah, I've seen that. In fact, when I bought my house, I won't tell you where he bought this house yet, but no part of, he had to sign a form, a bunch of forms, including his loan and whatnot. And this one said, no part of any lot in said subdivision shall ever be used or occupied by any Negro, mulatto, or person of Chinese or Japanese extraction or descent other than servants. And you're encouraged to guess what state this property was in and what year he was required to sign this piece of paper.
And which guy here brought the paper?
Mississippi, 1964.
Pretty interesting guess. Anyone?
Almost any state.
Closer.
California.
I'm guessing California. During the history of Asian exclusion laws here.
California is correct. The year?
1972.
63.
Well,
79.
okay, I'm going to answer that one because I have one of these for the only property that I ever bought, and it was in 1995. And it was in California, in Palo Alto, in a nice neighborhood called Barron Park.
Right.
And it was such an interesting closing with the title company and the real estate agent, because they hand me these forms. I'm going to put my signature on 19 different forms, and they hand this one to me and say, you can ignore clause 2. And I'm like, wow, I've never signed anything where someone told me to ignore it before I signed it. I guess I better read it. And while I'm reading it, they say, it's no longer enforced. And I'm still reading. And mine actually is worded slightly different. It says, anyone who is not of the white or Caucasian race, this, however, not being intended to prohibit the keeping of servants of any race. They all say that. So I'm still reading this, and I say, do I have to sign this? And they say, in the kindest words they can muster, only if you want to buy the house. And we make eye contact once more, and she says, it's perfectly standard.
That adds the irony considerably.
So what is this? So then they say, the reason Clause 2 is no longer enforced is it's prohibited by the 1968 Fair Housing Act. That Martin Luther King guy said it in process, not just the Civil Rights Act and the other things that he did, but in 1968, the Fair Housing Act. Now keep in mind how pernicious this is. No one ever took someone to court and said the neighborhood restrictions rule was violated by this guy who sold a house to a person of the wrong color. But everyone in that neighborhood knows that there's no point in showing that house to anybody who doesn't fit the spec. So you have your $500,000 ante. You're being shown houses that you can afford, maybe. You don't know why you're not being shown the Barron Park houses. There's a process which is continued through this very day to keep people of color from becoming middle class. And it's a very powerful force. And it's switched over from restrictive agreements like this to a criminal mortgage system that we'll touch on a little later. But it's been very successful. And Dr. King put the biggest dent that there's ever been in it. And it's affected every state. And a lot of the people in the movement that I'm sharing with you today, Replace Congress, come from the Deep South, from Georgia, from South Carolina, from all over the country. And I've always felt, and especially on King Day, it seems important to say that they're owed an apology. Because everyone likes to pretend or say, or really honestly believes, that Montgomery, Alabama is where the racism was happening. That bus where the law was explicit that you had to ride in the back was the real problem for black people in this country. Jim Crow laws in the southern states. And even in my junior high and high school in New York, we all liked to believe that that was the real problem. But my parents knew better. My mother's black, my father's wife, she stayed in the car when they looked at our house in Nassau County. And we got the house. And the owner, when we were moving in with the two brown kids and the dark woman, literally went out into the driveway, looked around at his neighbors and said, "I didn't know. I didn't know," like he was on some Norman Lear sitcom from the 70s. And because it was real, and you know, within weeks, of course, you know, they're good people, and within weeks they were bragging at their elementary school PTA meetings about their integrated school, and my parents were giggling in the background because we were the only two people integrating it, me and my sister. But that's New York, and this is California, and the racism that Martin Luther King repaired was all over the country, and it was just better hidden in places like New York and California. And sometimes you had to be a mixed couple even to find out what the rules were. And it put my parents into a very special position. And me, that's part of why I'm sharing this with you today.